So without further ado, Peadar Tóibín.
Níl mágad bhí sin andeas ar fad agus is even an deis a bheith anseo inniu libse ag an am seo just cúpla lá now ribbon an refran úfás of tábhachtach atá le teach. So gur míle mágad le sin. It's important for me, I suppose, at the start to say that Sinn Féin obviously are seeking to repeal the 8th. They are canvassing and campaigning to delete the 8th Amendment and will be looking to introduce abortion in certain circumstances in the upcoming referendum. That's obviously not my view. I have a different view to my party on this. And my view on this is that this is the most important human rights debate, campaign, fight of our generation, without a shadow of a doubt. There is nothing more important than the right to life. If anybody's right to life in this room was threatened, you would fight with all your might to actually protect your right to life. And, you know, it should be no different for anybody else. And just to give you a background of what Cherish All the Children Equally is that there are many people from a Republican background who might be a little bit left of centre in their political thinking, who would see themselves as progressives in that political space, but feel that the political establishment in that area doesn't represent its view on this particular issue. And those individuals have come together over the last 12 to 18 months to form an organisation called Cherish All the Children Equally. And that line is taken obviously from the proclamation of the Republic. And you know, it's like the ad. It does what it says in the tin. It seeks to cherish all the children of the nation equally. It's a 32-county organisation. It actually has people now in a branch in London, and there are people supporting Cherish in New York as well. And it has about 450 members. Now, I would say about roughly half of those members are actually Sinn Féin members, and there will be 12 Sinn Féin elected representatives who are involved in Cherish All the Children Equally, and the other half aren't. Some of them are former Sinn Féin people, but other people are from that kind of broad left or slightly Republican spectrum. And it's obviously operating in all the counties in the country. The biggest area would probably be the likes of Louth, Meath, Kildare and Wicklow, and then the likes of Cork and Donegal, and there'll be a healthy group here in Wexford. And really, I suppose it's to combat that perspective that, you know, if you're Republican, if you believe in the proclamation, or if you believe in social justice as kind of, you know, would be a typical left-wing view, it's to combat the view that in some way that the right to life isn't part of that, because it is part of those two ideologies. And really, the main the group is kind of based in each of the counties. Each of the county kind of have leaders who organise stuff, and the main activities that they're involved in is first of all in leafleting, and we've 2 good leaflets just on the go at the moment. That's the one that's probably finishing up. Some of you might have seen it, and this is one that was just off the press today, and it actually has a mock ballot paper. That's the ballot paper that you're going to be confronted with when you actually go into the polling booth come this day 2 weeks. And that's the first thing that the organisation is doing, trying to get as many of those leaflets into as many houses as possible. The second thing we're involved in is canvassing. Now, we're typically not involved in a separate canvass than the either Love Both canvass or the Life Institute canvass, because they're doing great jobs, they're well organised, and there's no point in replicating the infrastructure that delivers that at the moment. So our people are mostly involved in that particular canvass. We're also asking people to get involved in our social media platforms. So we have a Facebook page that has a good number of followers. There's good videos going up that. There's plenty of posts. So we're asking people to spread those posts and videos as regularly as they can. There's a good Twitter account as well. And we're asking people to join that and, again, retweet. And there's a really good website, as I've said. So that's a very good source of information around it. And I suppose what we're looking really for people to do is there's 2 weeks left. 2 weeks left will determine whether or not we wake up on the 26th and face into an abortion regime that is one of the most extreme abortion regimes on the planet, or we wake up to a regime where everybody is equal. That's the stark choice, and the only way that we can actually affect change or influence that is by our activism now. Activism afterwards is not worth a hill of beans. It has to be now. And it has to be, like we're asking in places like Meath, we're saying to people, commit 5 days a week for the next 2 weeks. And commit an hour and a half for each of those days in getting to doors. Because when you get to the doors, it's incredible how skin deep the yes vote is. Very quickly, when you explain the extremity of the proposal, people actually turn around and balk with horror with what's happening. And if you can get speaking to people, or if you can give them the knowledge on this leaflet, people will actually will respond very, very well to that. So I suppose one of the first things we try to tell people is that first and foremost, we believe that a mother's right to life must be protected in every single circumstance. That's a red line issue for ourselves. There's absolutely no way that we would support this 8th Amendment if we were not 100% confident that in every case, I have, at this stage, hundreds of obstetricians, of doctors, of midwives, and of nurses have said that they are totally confident that the 8th Amendment protects mothers' lives. And they have never seen any situation where they have seen that a mother's life was lost as a result of the 8th Amendment. And that's really important that people, I suppose, get to that. The other element to this for us is very simple. The unborn child is a living individual human being. And anybody that says different hasn't read a biology book and doesn't understand the science around it. I was in a debate with a Fine Gael minister a couple of days ago, and they said, well, it's a personal view of whether it's an individual living human being or not. And I said to her, that's like saying it's a personal view whether the earth is round or not. It's not a personal view, it's a fact. And if you try to dehumanize the child in the womb, well then that's the only way that you can try to introduce abortion. And when people start to say it's a personal view on whether a human being is a human being, well then they're making the mistakes of people who held slaves or people who did terrible atrocities in different wars did to people. It's very important that we literally try to explain the humanity of the individual living in the womb. And obviously some of the posters we see are very good posters. They explain to people that at 9, 10, 11 weeks these children can stretch, they can yawn, they can suck their thumb, they're practically fully formed at 12 weeks. 12 weeks is the age where most families now meet their child for the first time. They have photographs in their households of their children, the first photograph of the children at 12 weeks. And this is the time that Simon Harris thinks it's okay that a child can be aborted for any reason whatsoever. And the scary thing is, it's not just at 12 weeks that this is the case. I know that, Valerie, I think you're going to speak about it a little bit later, but doctors have indicated now that the law is so broad that it actually allows for abortion far later than that for very nebulous reasons. Peter Boylan has stated himself that the mental health reasons are determined if they're serious or not if the mother decides they're serious. So they're not objective medical markers, they're subjective medical markers. It's a form of self-diagnosis to a certain extent. And it's important as well that, there are difficult cases that happen to individuals. There's a small number of really, really horrendous situations that mothers, fathers, and unborn children find themselves every year in this country. And our response to those people, I believe, should be a response of compassion and care and love and support. Because these are our family, they're our friends, they're our neighbours as well. But the solution for one person can't be the ending of a life of another person. It just can't be. I can't ask for anybody to lose their life for me to have a solution to whatever crisis that I am in myself. I suppose the other issue for me is that, people say that if you introduce abortion here, really what you're doing is you're just allowing for the abortions that happen in Britain to happen here. You're not displacing the number of abortions at all. But that's not the case. Access increases demand in every service that's used. If it wasn't the case, there'd be one Tesco's in Dublin for the whole country. There'd be one hospital in Dublin for the whole country. People know that you can't access services unless those services are local and accessible. In the States, studies have shown that for every 100 miles that you live away from an abortion clinic, the abortion rate drops about 10%. And if you go to Britain or most of the European countries where very liberal abortion regimes are in place, you see a case where for every 4 babies that are born, 1 child is aborted. And that's a horrific figure to think of. 9 million abortions in Britain since it was legalised. About 20 million abortions on the planet this year so far, which have happened. And for most people, that's absolutely shocking. So 1 in 5 in Britain is a figure, but 1 in 20 is the figure here. So the lack of access, the lack of legal access radically reduces it. Now lots of people saying, well, sure, you still have abortion even with this law. But I'd ask the question, what law actually fully eradicates what it's meant to outlaw anyways? No law fully eradicates what it's meant to outlaw. But what a law does is significantly reduces the incidence of the action that's so damaging. So, and then I would ask people, there is a difference between having low abortion rates than having high ones, because there are hundreds of thousands of people alive today in Ireland because of the 8th Amendment. It's probably the most successful law with regards to protection of life. And even for 1 child, even if you could actually institute a law that would save 1 child's life, that would be worth it. Because for that 1 child, it's 100% of their existence. And people have said to me, Peadar, what happens now if you lose your job with regards to the stance that you've taken on this campaign? And I've simply said, if I lose my job, it's not the end of the world. But if abortion is legalised and a child loses his life, it is the end of the world. And that's the radical difference between what I'm doing and what could be brought into place very shortly. And just to give it a comparative analysis, Scotland would have roughly the same population as we do. It has about 5.5 million people living in that state. It had an abortion rate of 1,500 a year when before abortion was legalised. And 4 years later, that increased to 7,000 abortions within 4 years. And now there's 12,000 abortions in Scotland on an annual basis. So there's no way that you could radically increase access in this state and not see the incidence increase in the other side of it. The other part of this particular argument that I have a difficulty with is that abortion, not intentionally, but by default actually is a form of discrimination. And if you look on an individual basis, obviously abortion equals inequality of outcome. So 1 child lives and another child dies. And as a Republican and as a man of the left, as a socialist, I am completely horrified when I see those types of inequalities. But if you look at the bigger picture, and again, I wouldn't say it's eugenics by purpose, but I'd say it's eugenics by default. So you have, obviously, and people have discussed this, the effect it has with regards to people with disabilities. So in countries like Denmark, and France, and Britain, Norway, Iceland, you have rates of abortion of 90% plus for children who were diagnosed in the womb with Down syndrome. Now that is a shocking situation. In the Netherlands, the Minister for Health was asked a question, and her response was that if the right to choose means we do not have people with Down syndrome born anymore in this country, that is something we must accept. And that's not something I'm willing to accept whatsoever. Because for those individual children, it's a catastrophe. But for a society, when we delete that level of diversity, we ourselves are poorer as a result when we don't have the diversity of people. In Britain, there's an organisation called Don't Screen Us Out. Imagine, and I say this all the time, we think 2018 we're at the zenith of our enlightenment, and yet we have people, the most vulnerable in society, forming groups, pleading with us not to screen them out. It's unbelievable. Like, there's so many parts of this debate that I have to read 3 or 4 times before I actually believe the facts. There's so many parts of this debate where I actually have to draw a breath and go, is that actually true? I was reading there recently, there's 100 abortions in Britain every year from where there's multiple births. So this is where there's twins or triplets or quadruplets, where one of those children are aborted and the rest are allowed to live, simply because there's a multiple. There's about 9 abortions in Britain a year for children with cleft palate, and that's up to about 22 weeks. And that's an operation is very, very simple these days to fix. So there's so much elements of this that are really just hard to believe, and I'd really ask people to read into it. Other elements of the issue. Oh yeah, there's an argument at the moment that's put out there. Well, technically you can actually identify if a child has Down syndrome, but it's not practical. But that's not the case. We have people like Fergal Malone at the Rotunda who stated that he can actually test for Down syndrome before 12 weeks with an accuracy level of 12 or 99%. We had Ronan O'Mahony actually go on the radio recently and admit that it's happening thousands of times in the Rotunda Hospital. And then there's other people who say, don't raise the issue of disability because it's unfair to raise it and to make it difficult for people with disabilities. But I'll tell you, as an elected representative, I've had dozens of people who have disabilities or allow them to raise our voice from this particular debate. And they've actually said it's nonsense to think that people with disabilities have a homogeneous view on something, or that one organisation can claim to represent everybody with disabilities. It's the same with people with the so-called abilities. Nobody can actually say that they represent everybody, in a particular group, and therefore seek to censor views with differing angles on it. There should be all views are entitled to be expressed both with people with disabilities and people with so-called abilities as well. Another issue that actually shocks me, it's an issue that you have to read 3 or 4 times to actually believe, to really believe the fact. But there's 100 million missing women in the world at the moment due to gender selection abortion or infanticide. And this is where in countries, especially in China and India, but also in Britain and also in the US and Canada, where culturally and economically families feel that they want a son. And as a result, if the mother is pregnant with an unborn baby girl, the child is aborted. And I've been on the radio on this, and I've been asked, but should nobody, do you not trust Irish women to be better than making those particular choices? And my response to that is, first of all, female genital mutilation is happening in Ireland. That's the fact of the matter. People travel actually out of Ireland for female genital mutilation. And secondly, Irish people are not morally superior to anybody else. And anybody that thinks so is fooling themselves. The same needs and desires, pressures and expectations and changes are relevant in our society as they are anywhere else at the moment. And these things are happening in Britain, and they're happening in Canada, and they're happening in the United States. Also, and people don't realise this, as abortion really affects ethnic minorities. So in Scotland and Britain, if you're from an ethnic background, you're far more likely to be aborted. In New York City, for example, more unborn babies that are African American are aborted than actually make it to term. It's incredible. Over 50% of the cases. And that's a lot higher than Hispanic kids and far higher than white kids in New York City. And it's interesting because if you actually look in some of the polls, and this is just on an aside on the left ring, white ring stuff, if you're a Fine Gael voter, and if you're wealthy, if you live in South Dublin, you're more likely to be a repeal voter. But if you're not a Fine Gael voter, if you're slightly left-wing, if you're from maybe a more working-class background, or if you're from a Republican background or a rural background, you're far more likely to be a right-to-life voter. And you can kind of understand why in a way, because it's actually the people who are more vulnerable that get stuck more often with these types of laws. And again, in America, 70% of the children that are aborted are from low-income backgrounds. So the poor are far more likely to suffer from abortion than the wealthy in America and in other countries as well. One of the points that I really find difficult to deal with when it comes to the likes of Simon Harris or Leo Varadkar is they say that they're actually pro-choice. Now, I would make the point that some of the activities that they're involved in make many women feel that don't actually have a choice. So, for example, you can see that you have, let's say, about 3,200 people are in emergency our children are in emergency accommodation at the moment, 10,000 people. And last year and this year, there have been dozens of pregnant women who have been homeless. Now, if you really care about women in pregnancy, in difficulties, putting a roof over their heads would be one of the first things that you do for those women. And that's not happening. There's obviously 714 people on trolleys at the moment. 52,000 children waiting on waiting lists for healthcare in this country. 8,500 of those to see specialists. So how can Leo say that he's pro-choice when the actions, the economic decisions he's making are actively making women feel they don't have a choice? And that's where I think that we could actually make a radical difference in this. In reports that have been carried out in this state and elsewhere show that at least 40% of the abortions that are happening because women feel they don't have the economic wherewithal to actually raise the child and bring the child into society. So investment in maternity services, investment in health services, investment in housing, investment in education, in real jobs with decent living wages, in childcare. And these are the types of things that give actually choices to people, to give them the confidence that they know that they can raise the child that they have in the womb in future. And that will be the radical step that the government could take to actually reduce the abortion rates in this state, if they so desires to do so. One of the difficulties I have in this issue as well is, obviously, as a politician in Leinster House, I, along with everybody else, have been amazed with the way that politicians have flip-flopped on this issue just in the last number of years. So Simon Harris wrote a letter to all his constituents in 2012 and convinced them that he was a pro-life TD. And people went out and canvassed for him because he said he would fight against any efforts to get rid of the Eighth Amendment in the state. And people like Micheál Martin as well said they were solidly pro-life on this issue. And then they, I would say that I haven't seen such a choreographed flip-flop or U-turn in political history. It's nearly the same. It's kind of like synchronized swimmers all moving together in a pool on this particular issue. And this is the type of issue you don't flip-flop in. This is the type of issue that is kind of like part of your identity, that's ingrained in your DNA, that you would have it's one of those defining traits of who your character actually is, where you stand on the right to life. And these people have done this notorious U-turn, and now they're saying, hand over all of the lawmaking ability on this critical human rights issue to us and trust us. Well, I would say to you, you've a better chance to know what the third secret of Fatima is, you've a better chance to know next week's lotto numbers are, than actually know where these politicians will stand in a fortnight's time. Simon Coveney had multiple views on this issue on the same day. And that's how shocking, when it comes to some of the politicians' perspectives on this. I suppose, for me, again, this comes down to who you are as and what your outlook should be. And I have a simple outlook when it comes to politics and comes to ideology. And the fact is that all of us live under the same sky. We are all responsible for each other as human beings, no matter if we're the weakest, most voiceless person in society, or if we're the richest, strongest person in society. And that the progressive society that should exist is a one that no mother or child is left behind. And my instinct in this is, and there's two Martin Luther King quotes that actually I think are very relevant to this, and one is in the leaflet. It says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And there's no bigger injustice, I believe, when it comes to abortion. And the other issue is, and this is very important because there's a lot of people out there who are a little bit in the closet in this issue. And I have spoken to a lot of people in the trade unions, a lot of people in the civil society, big, strong men and women who've been involved in many battles all their lives, who have, outspoken critics of the government. And on this issue, they're whispering to me about the fact that they agree with my views. And I'll give you an example. I was at a meeting there about a year ago with about 10 union people. And at the end of it, 3 union people stayed back and they just said, "Listen, Peadar, we wanted to tell you that we 100% agree with you on this issue. This is a life and death issue. This is a human rights issue. We didn't want to say it in front of the other guys because, God, it's really contentious and it's a difficult issue. And I thanked him very much, and we had a chat, and I walked into the door. And then I walked back towards my office, and there was two people standing on the hall, and they were from the meeting as well, and they said, and they looked around like this, and I said, we just wanted to say to you, we believe that, that what you're doing is great, and we would 100% support your view. We couldn't say it in there because, the other guys would come down as like a ton of bricks. Like, and all these people knew each other. And it just really hit home. And I would, some of the most senior people in the trade union movement have told me off the record that where they stand on this, but getting them out, you'd need a crowbar the size of a football post to actually push them out into the sunlight on this issue, which is a shocking thing. And the other Martin Luther King quote is, "Life begins to end the day we become silent about the things that really matter." And that's why I think that we need to make sure that we're not silent in this issue, that we wear our badges with pride, we're talking to our kids, that we're talking to our parents, that we're talking to our friends, and that we're out every single day, that we're finding our voice, we're speaking up, we're getting active, and that we're going to win this referendum tonight.